I walked into the new house without a sound and froze. My mother-in-law was celebrating, feasting in the warmth, while my mother, the woman who had bought this very home, was washing dishes in freezing water, shivering from the cold. Then my husband snatched a plate from her hands. "Get your filthy hands off my new wedding china, and get the food to our guests, lowlife." Welcome to my channel. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now, let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. Marcus Peterson. I didn't start a scene. I simply called my father. Within 5 minutes, they were begging me for a quiet, peaceful divorce. But to understand how that nightmare turned into their final judgment, we have to go back exactly 30 minutes. Simone, or Sim, was driving her SUV through a heavy snowstorm, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles were white, but her spirit was calm. Her audit assignment in Chicago had wrapped up a day early. The audit of a major logistics firm had worn her out, and now she only dreamed of one thing: walking into her warm, bright house, hugging her mother and husband, and finally getting some decent sleep. This custom home in the upscale sanctuary subdivision wasn't just a house. It was a sacrifice. Vivian Jones, Sim's mother, had sold her solid rural home in South Carolina, sold the land, the livestock, everything she had built up over decades, so that the young couple could have a respectable place to live. Sim remembered how her mother, teary-eyed, had handed stacks of cash over to Marcus, saying she only wanted a peaceful old age close to her daughter. Marcus had sworn then that he would treat his mother-in-law like a queen. The SUV smoothly braked by the tall, wrought-iron gates. Sim decided against using the intercom, not wanting to disturb anyone. She quietly opened the pedestrian gate with her key. The first-floor windows were brightly lit. Through the frosty air drifted the scent of roasting meat and loud, booming laughter. It was Denise Peterson, her mother-in-law, laughing. Sim managed a small smile. "Must be a party." She gently opened the front door and stepped into the foyer. The house smelled of expensive perfume and roast turkey. Sim inhaled, ready to shout, "Surprise!" But the words caught in her throat. From the dining room, where the chandelier was sparkling, there was a wide opening into the kitchen, and that view broke Sim's world in two. In the dining room, sitting at the massive mahogany table, was Denise Peterson. She was wearing a festive, deep burgundy dress, and before her sat platters of prime steak, gourmet fish appetizers, and bottles of high-end scotch. She was cheerfully regaling an unseen companion, popping another appetizer into her mouth. The dining room was hot, with a fireplace crackling merrily. But the kitchen was in icy darkness. The heat had been completely shut off there. The window was cracked open, letting in a bitter draft. Huddled over the sink was Vivian Jones. Sim's mother wore her old, worn winter coat that she'd brought from the farm and a knitted shawl. She was trembling all over. Her hands, red and swollen from the icy water, frantically scrubbed a dinner plate. No steam rose from her lips. It was almost as cold in the kitchen as it was outside. Sim froze, unable to draw a breath. She saw her mother try to turn off the water, but the faucet only sputtered. There was no hot water. Conserving energy. They were conserving energy on the woman who had bought these walls for them. At that moment, Marcus burst into the kitchen. He was in a crisp white shirt, flushed and content. But when he saw Vivian, his face twisted in malice. He crossed the floor in 2 bounds. Vivian flinched, pulling her head down into her shoulders, and tried to wipe the plate with the edge of her old coat. Marcus snatched the fine china from her hands with such force that Vivian staggered back, hitting her hip against the counter. "Get your filthy hands off my new wedding china," he hissed, spitting slightly. "You want to break a plate that cost more than your whole life? Now get the food to our guests, lowlife. Move it!" He shoved the elderly woman roughly in the back, steering her toward the dining room like a disgraced servant. "Marcus, please, I'll be quick," Vivian whispered, her voice shaking from tears and cold. "Shut up and serve my mother," Marcus roared, and he walked back into the warmth, adjusting his hairstyle. Sim stood in the shadow of the hallway. Her heart seemed to stop, then started beating with a heavy, muffled thud that echoed in her temples. The scream was trapped deep inside, transforming into a cold, calculated fury. She didn't charge in, she didn't yell. A scene wouldn't solve anything right now. A scene was emotion, and she needed action. She silently took a step back, then another, quietly opened the front door, and slipped back out into the snowy night. The cold air burned her face, clearing her thoughts. Sim pulled out her phone. Her fingers were steady. She found a number in her contacts that Marcus thought was for a retirement home or some backwater relative in the sticks. Dad. It rang only once. "I'm listening, daughter," came a low, gravelly voice. "Dad," Sim said, her voice even and dead. "You're close. I was just pulling up. Wanted to surprise you. What's going on?" "Yeah. Walk straight in right now and bring the papers. All the papers." She ended the call. Sim stood on the porch for exactly 3 minutes, watching the falling snow. Then she wiped a non-existent tear, straightened her shoulders, and opened the door again. This time it was loud, confident, and punctuated with a slam. She stomped her boots loudly, shaking the snow off them, and walked into the foyer. "Sim!" Marcus's voice from the dining room was falsely cheerful. He rushed out to meet her, wiping his greasy lips with a napkin on the fly. "You're back already? We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." He tried to hug her, but Sim dodged him, walking straight past him toward the dining table. Denise froze with a fork halfway to her mouth. Vivian, standing in the corner with a serving tray, went pale and lowered her gaze, trying to hide her red hands under her apron. "Hello, Denise." Sim nodded at her mother-in-law without looking directly at her, and then approached her mother. She took Vivian's freezing hands in hers. "Why are you wearing a coat, and why is there no heat in the kitchen?" Marcus nervously laughed, stepping between them. "Oh, Sim, you know your mother. She has senior quirks. She got hot. She opened the windows herself, and she put the coat on because, well, she got a little chilly. We told her, 'Sit down.' She just says, 'I want to help. I want to be useful.'" "Useful?" Sim repeated. "And she also wanted to break your china herself?" "What?" Marcus stopped smiling. "What are you talking about?" Sim silently pulled out her phone, placed it in the center of the table right next to the platter of steak, and pressed the play button. The recording of Marcus's voice, clear and loud, broke the deadly silence. "Get your filthy hands off my new wedding china. Now get the food to our guests, lowlife. Move it." Denise's face broke out in red splotches. Marcus's jaw dropped, but no sound came out. His eyes darted between the phone and his wife. "Sim, that's taken out of context," he finally sputtered. "You don't understand. She pushed my buttons. She did it on purpose." "5 minutes, Sim said, looking at her watch. "You have 5 minutes to pack your bags." "Are you kicking us out?" Denise shrieked, jumping up from her chair. "Out of my son's house? How dare you?" "This is our house. We're registered residents here. This house was bought with my mother's money." Sim cut her off in an icy tone. "And you turned her into a slave, legally speaking." Marcus suddenly straightened up, a cocky note entering his voice. "Half the assets belong to me as your husband, and we're not going anywhere. Try to throw us out in the snow. I'll call the police. You have no right." At that moment, the heavy front door, which Marcus had locked with 3 deadbolts, swung open with a drawn-out, dreadful screech. A plume of frosty air surged into the house. Marcus and Denise flinched and spun around. Standing in the doorway was a tall, imposing man. He was 65, but he looked like a brick wall. He wore an expensive, perfectly fitted black cashmere coat. His gray hair was neatly slicked back, and his eyes held a kind of authority that made you want to disappear. This was James Davis, not the frail old man with a fishing rod Marcus thought he was, but a man whose glare had once made suspects tremble in the district attorney's office. Behind him, 2 sturdy men in dark suits stepped out, silent as shadows, carrying leather briefcases. "Good evening," James Davis said. His voice filled the entire space, drowning out the crackle of the fireplace. He wasn't yelling, but the baritone made the dishes rattle in the cabinet. Who are you?" Marcus stammered, backing away. "How did you get in? This is private property." James slowly pulled off his leather gloves, his heavy gaze fixed on his son-in-law. "You're mistaken, young man. Private property is something that belongs to you, and this house, as of this minute, does not." Sim's father walked into the room without taking off his boots. The two men followed. One of them placed a document with a notarized seal on the table in front of Marcus. "Remember that private investor you borrowed $300,000 from last month to finish the roofing?" James asked, walking up to the table and picking up a steak appetizer. He sniffed it with distaste and dropped it back on the plate. "The one who agreed to give you the money against the collateral of all movable and immovable property, no questions asked?" Marcus turned white. "How do you know that? That was confidential." "That was my guy." James smiled, but the smile was more terrifying than a snarl. "I loaned you the money through an intermediary, and in the contract, which you, idiot, signed without looking, there was one little clause, Clause 4.2. It stated the immediate confiscation of the collateral if payment was late by even 1 day. Marcus gulped hard. "But the payment was yesterday. I forgot. I thought 1 day wouldn't matter." "It matters," James Davis said, nodding to his men. "The deadline passed at midnight last night. This house, the furniture, that china, and even your socks are now my property. You have 0 minutes to pack. Get out of here." One of the security men silently took a roll of bright orange stickers from his briefcase and, ignoring Marcus's protests, slapped the first tag right onto the soup tureen from the new china set. The sticky label lay squarely across the gold-plated pattern. "What are you doing?" Marcus shrieked, lunging for the table. "That's collectible porcelain. The adhesive will ruin the enamel." The second guard gently but firmly pushed him away with his hand, like swatting an annoying fly, and stuck the next sticker onto the back of the antique chair Denise had just been sitting in. "Inventory," James said, walking toward the fireplace and warming his hands. "All of this is collateral for the debt now. Any attempt to remove, sell, or damage an item will be treated as felony theft." He motioned to his men. "Keep going, guys. The TV, the coats in the closet, the appliances, everything goes on the list." Denise, who had been playing the lady of the house moments before, slid down the wall. Her face was gray. "Jim, Yuri Fyodorovich, darling," she wailed, clasping her hands in prayer. "We're family. How can you do this? The boy made a mistake. It happens. We'll pay everything back. Why be so cruel right away? We're family." "Family," James repeated without turning his head. "Family is that woman you forced to wash dishes in freezing water. You two are parasites." Sim walked to the table, swept up the remains of the feast, the steak, the fish, the appetizers, and dumped it all into the trash can with a clang. "Get out," she said quietly. "Right now. I don't want to see either of you in this house for another second." Marcus, realizing that pleading was useless, suddenly changed his expression. The fear in his eyes was replaced by a nasty, rat-like glint. He exchanged a look with his mother. Denise, catching his eye, suddenly stopped crying. She straightened up, adjusted her hair, and reached into her purse. "We're not going anywhere," she announced, pulling out a sheet of paper, folded into quarters. "And you, Sim, and your ex-district attorney father can't do a thing about it." She triumphantly slapped the paper onto the table in front of James. "What is this?" he asked, touching the sheet distastefully. "A certificate of residency." Denise smiled maliciously. "Marcus registered me here a week ago, and he's registered himself. This is our only residence. And according to the law," she raised a finger, "it's forbidden to evict people from their only home into the cold during winter, even for debt. Sue all you want. The courts will take years, and until then, we live here." Marcus beamed, seeing his father-in-law frown. They had prepared. They knew Sim might rebel sooner or later, and they had set their trap in advance. "Dad?" Sim looked at her father questioningly. James skimmed the document, clenching his jaw. "They're formally correct," he conceded. "Without a court order, the police won't remove them right now. It's winter." "Exactly!" Marcus flopped down onto the sofa, right on top of an orange sticker. So call off your goons, old man. We're staying, and we'll live just as we were. Sim looked at her husband's smug face. Everything inside her had burned out, leaving only cold ash. Fine, she said. You're staying, but you won't live as you were. She turned and went upstairs. Marcus tried to shout something after her, but the guard stepped toward him, and he bit his tongue. Sim walked into the master suite, spacious, with a huge bed and a separate bathroom that Marcus had immediately claimed after moving in, banishing his mother-in-law to the tiny guest room on the first floor. Sim opened the closet and methodically began throwing Marcus's belongings out into the corridor. Expensive suits, shirts, and ties flew over the banister and landed on the floor below, right at Denise's feet. "What are you doing?" Marcus bellowed from downstairs. "Clearing the room for the lady of the house," Sim shouted back. "Mom, come upstairs. You live here now." Vivian, still in her coat, fearfully shrank against the wall in the foyer. "Sim, no, I can stay downstairs," she started. "No, Mom. You're coming upstairs, into a hot bath and a soft bed. And those two?" She nodded toward her husband and mother-in-law. "They can sleep wherever they like, even on the doormat. I'm taking the keys to the master suite." That night, the house turned into a battlefield. Sim locked herself and her mother in the suite, listening to Marcus downstairs arguing with the guards, trying to secure a spot on the couch. James Davis had left, leaving 2 of his men to stand watch in the living room. In the morning, the war moved into a guerrilla phase. Sim woke up freezing. The radiators were icy. She went down to the utility room and found the window flung wide open and the boiler shut off. An error code was blinking on the control panel. Denise was sitting in the kitchen, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea from her own mug, the only one the guards had allowed her to keep off the inventory list. "Oh, something broke," she trilled, noticing Sim. "Your mother probably pressed the wrong button with her clumsy hands yesterday. Technology is complicated. It's not for farm folk. Now we'll freeze until you can call a technician. And technicians are expensive these days." She was openly gloating. She knew Sim wouldn't let her mother freeze and would fix everything at her own expense. It was a war of attrition. Sim silently walked past her to the refrigerator. It was empty. The groceries Sim had brought yesterday were gone. "We ate," her mother-in-law smiled. "Stress gave us an appetite." Sim didn't yell. She pulled out her phone and called the security agency her firm used. An hour later, a broad-shouldered security guard in uniform stood right by the kitchen entrance. "This man will monitor the integrity of the life support systems and the food supply," Sim announced, looking her mother-in-law straight in the eye. "Any attempt to approach the boiler or the refrigerator without my permission will be physically prevented. No one will give you any more food. If you want to eat, go to the store, with your own money." Denise choked on her tea. Sim returned to the master suite, where she had set up a makeshift office. She was an auditor. Her job was to find what people were trying to hide, and now she was about to conduct the most thorough audit of her life. Marcus's laptop lay on the desk. He had panicked and forgotten it in the living room when James started the inventory, and the guards had simply brought the computer to Sim as property. She knew the password. Marcus was too lazy to change 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. She opened the banking app. Marcus's accounts were almost empty, but Sim was interested in the transaction history. She exported a statement for the past 3 years and began compiling a spreadsheet. Her eyes scanned the rows: restaurants, designer clothes, cash withdrawals. The amounts were huge. Where had the money that she and her mother had given for construction gone? But one regular transaction caught her attention. Every first of the month, $5,000. Payment description: residential lease payment. Sim frowned. What lease? They had lived in Denise's condo until moving here, and then they were here. Why was Marcus renting an apartment? She clicked on the payment details. The recipient was masked, but the address was listed: Peachtree Street 100, Unit 4B, downtown Atlanta, a luxury high-rise. Sim opened the documents folder on the desktop. Deep inside the system folders was a file: Agreement Peachtree. She opened it. It was a 3-year lease for a 2-bedroom apartment. payer, Marcus. And in the resident section was a name that made Sim's vision swim. Tiffany Wells. Sim remembered the previous week. Denise had brought over a modest young woman with a round belly. "This is my goddaughter Tiffany, darling," the mother-in-law had chirped. "Poor thing, her husband left her. She needs support so badly." Sim had felt sorry for her then, giving her a bag of maternity clothes and even offering help with doctors. Tiffany Wells had been living in an apartment paid for by Marcus for 3 years. For 3 years, her husband had been supporting another woman with the money he stole from his own family. And judging by the timing of the goddaughter's pregnancy, the child was not from the runaway husband at all. Sim slammed the laptop lid shut with a sound like a gunshot. An hour later, she was standing at the door of Unit 4B on Peachtree Street. She wore a uniform jacket borrowed from one of her firm's drivers and a baseball cap pulled low. In her hands was a box with the logo of an expensive children's boutique. She rang the bell. The door didn't open immediately. Tiffany appeared in the doorway. She wore a silk robe, unbuttoned at the chest. Her belly was quite noticeable. "Delivery for Marcus Peterson," Sim mumbled, trying not to look up. "Paid for." "Oh, finally!" Tiffany beamed, grabbing the box. "Marcus promised they would deliver it today. It's the outfit for the baby to wear home." She stepped inside the hallway without closing the door and eagerly began tearing open the packaging. Sim stepped in after her, taking off her cap. "I hope the size is right," she said in her normal voice. Tiffany froze. She slowly turned around and the box slipped from her hands. "You?" she whispered. "What are you doing here?" Sim was looking not at the mistress's face, but at her neck. There, a thin gold chain with a vintage ruby pendant, framed in small diamonds, sparkled in the opening of the robe. It was Sim's grandmother's family necklace, the one that had disappeared from her jewelry box 6 months ago. Marcus had claimed then that the cleaning lady must have stolen it, or that Sim herself had lost it. "That's a beautiful necklace," Sim said softly, stepping closer. "Grandma used to say it only brings luck to honest women." Tiffany instinctively covered the jewelry with her hand. "Get out, I'm calling the police right now. Marcus will be here soon." "Marcus isn't coming," Sim chuckled. "Marcus has a few little problems with residency and his conscience right now, and I wouldn't call the police. The report for the theft of this necklace has been at the precinct for 6 months. All I have to do is make one phone call, and you'll be giving birth in a jail infirmary." Tiffany paled. Her bravado began to crumble. "I didn't steal it," she shrieked. "It was a gift. Denise gave it to me. She said it was her family heirloom." "Take it off," Sim commanded, holding out her hand. "Right now." Tiffany, sobbing, unclasped the fastener and threw the necklace into Sim's palm. "Choke on it," she spat venomously. "It will all be mine soon anyway. The house and Marcus." "The house?" Sim repeated, pocketing the necklace. "Yes, the house." Tiffany suddenly smiled maliciously, stroking her belly. "Denise promised that as soon as that old hag, your mother, is put into a nursing home, Marcus and I will move in. That's where she belongs. She doesn't know what she's doing anymore anyway. And the baby needs fresh air, not this dusty apartment." Sim's vision narrowed. So it wasn't just about the money. They weren't just planning to fleece Vivian Jones. They planned to destroy her, declare her incompetent, and lock her away in a state facility to make room for their new family. "Thank you for the information," Sim said in an icy tone. "Now I know everything I need to know." She turned and left, leaving Tiffany bewildered in the middle of the hallway. That evening, a suffocating silence reigned in the house, but Sim decided to break it. She set the table in the dining room, not for guests, but for family. She set the plates, lit the candles, and invited everyone to dinner. Marcus and Denise came down cautiously. They were starving. The guard in the kitchen was diligently doing his job, and they had been surviving all day on crackers found in their rooms. Seeing the roasted chicken, Marcus swallowed hard. "Sit," Sim invited them with a gesture. Vivian was already sitting at the head of the table, dressed in her best new spring dress that Sim had retrieved from the suitcase. She looked confused, but held herself with dignity. Sim sat across from her husband. The ruby on her neck glowed scarlet in the candlelight. Denise, who had reached for the bread, froze. Her eyes widened, fixed on the jewelry. A fork clattered onto a plate. "Pretty, isn't it?" Sim asked, touching the stone. "I found it today in a very unexpected place, on the neck of a certain pregnant goddaughter." Marcus choked on his water. He coughed, his face turning crimson. You went to see her?" he choked out. "I did," Sim nodded calmly. "A sweet girl, very candid. She told me all about your plans, the retirement home for Mom, the move-in." Vivian gasped and pressed a hand to her chest. "Retirement home," she whispered. "Daughter, what is she talking about?" "She's talking, Mom, about how these people," Sim swept her hand over her husband and mother-in-law, "were planning to declare you mentally unfit to move in here with Marcus's new wife and their baby." "That's a lie!" Marcus jumped up. "She's lying about everything. Tiffany she's just an acquaintance." Sim silently picked up the TV remote and pressed the power button. On the huge screen in the living room, a photo of the lease agreement appeared. Marcus's name, Tiffany's name, signatures, dates, 3 years of lies in high definition. "You paid for her apartment with the money we were saving for Mom's medical care," Sim said. "You lied to my face for 3 years. You have a child on the side, and you wanted to throw my mother out of her own home like trash." Marcus collapsed back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. He was crushed. The evidence was irrefutable. The silence in the room became sticky, heavy. It felt like someone was about to scream or beg for forgiveness, but then a laugh broke out, a quiet, dry, rasping laugh. Denise Peterson was laughing. She neatly cut a piece of chicken, put it in her mouth, and after chewing, looked at Sim with an expression of complete superiority. There was no fear or shame in her eyes, only cold calculation. "So you found out. What's your point?" she asked, wiping her lips with a napkin. "You think you won? You think you can throw us out now in disgrace?" "I don't think. I know," Sim replied. "Tomorrow I'm filing for divorce and eviction." "Eviction?" Denise smirked again. "Did you look closely at the deed for the house, smarty pants?" "Sure, the house is in your mother's name. The house, yes," the mother-in-law corrected her. "The walls, the roof, the foundation. But the land it sits on—" She paused dramatically, savoring the moment. "The land, darling, belongs to me." Sim frowned. "What nonsense! My mother bought the lot." "Your mother provided the money," Denise corrected. "And I handled the paperwork. Remember that power of attorney Vivian signed 3 years ago? To handle all the construction affairs? There was one small line in there. Right to purchase real estate in my name." The mother-in-law leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest. "So, the half-acre lot that this wonderful custom home sits on was purchased in my name, and I have the deed." Vivian cried softly. "Denise, how could you? We had an agreement." "It was all for my son, darling," Denise snapped. "Not for you, you country bumpkin." She turned back to Sim, her voice hard as steel. "So the breakdown is this, daughter-in-law. The house is yours, but the land is mine. I demand that you move your house off my land, tear it down, or pay me rent. Say $20,000 a month, starting today." Sim stared at her, understanding that this wasn't a bluff. This woman had planned everything from the start. She wasn't just a thief, she was a professional predator. "And if we don't pay?" Sim asked. "Then I'll sue to have the illegal structure demolished," Denise shrugged. "And believe me, I'll win. I have all the paperwork." She picked up a chicken leg and took a bite with relish. "So no one is going anywhere. Tiffany will move in here as soon as she gives birth, and you and your mother will live in the guest annex and work off the rent, and that's my final word." Denise wasn't kidding. The next morning, Sim woke up to the sound of a heavy engine roaring outside. She looked out the window and saw an old rusty dump truck slowly pulling into the gates and parking directly across the only exit from the property. The driver, a grumpy guy in a greasy jacket, jumped out of the cab, locked the door, and walked away on the road without looking back. The dump truck completely blocked everything. No one could drive out, and no one could drive in. "What does this mean?" Sim asked, descending to the kitchen, where Denise was victoriously sipping coffee. "It's my land," the mother-in-law replied without looking up from her mug, "and I decide who and what parks on it." By noon, it became clear that this wasn't just a petty stunt. It was a siege. A septic pump truck arrived at the gates. The septic tank was overflowing from the day before. The driver honked, got out, looked at the blocking dump truck, spat, and drove off. The hose simply couldn't reach the tank cap over the fence. An hour later, an odor appeared in the house. Faint at first, then unbearable. Using the plumbing became impossible. The courier with the week's worth of groceries Sim had ordered also turned around at the gates. Denise went out onto the porch and yelled with a smirk that entry onto private property was forbidden. If he tried to climb the fence, she would call the police for trespassing. "She's starving us and drowning us in our own sewage," Sim concluded, looking at the empty refrigerator. By evening, the house had turned into an icy, foul-smelling tomb. Vivian sat in her room, wrapped in a blanket and crying. "Sim, honey," she sniffled when her daughter checked on her. "Let's just leave. Let them choke on this house. I can't take this anymore. The smell, the cold. I'm old. I don't need much. We can rent a room somewhere." "No," Sim cut her off. Her voice was tight with tension. "If we leave now, we lose. We'll give them everything you worked for your entire life. I won't let that creature win." A cold fire burned in Sim's eyes. She wasn't going to surrender. She had worked in logistics for 15 years. She knew how to deliver cargo to the most inaccessible points in the country. Surely she could organize the provisioning of her own home. Late that night, when Denise and Marcus had fallen asleep, confident in their victory, Sim went out into the backyard. Behind the shed, there was a small gap in the fence, known only to the neighborhood cats. In the darkness beyond the fence, headlights flashed. It was her company's service pickup truck. The driver, an old acquaintance of Sim's, silently tossed 2 heavy backpacks over the fence. They contained food, bottled water, portable chemical toilets, and gas burners. "Thank you, Sergeant," Sim whispered into the darkness. "Hang in there, Jones," the driver replied. "If you need it, we'll drop supplies from a helicopter." They wouldn't starve or drown in sewage. The blockade was broken, but defense wasn't victory. She needed to go on the offensive. The next morning, leaving her mother under the protection of the security guard, Sim walked past the dump truck and headed for the city. Her destination was the county archive. She knew that if Denise was talking about legality, there had to be a loophole. People like her mother-in-law didn't play by the rules. They looked for technicalities. The archive was dusty and quiet. The woman archivist, recognizing Sim's last name, brightened. "Oh, you're James Davis's daughter. What a man he was, such a district attorney. I remember how he saved us from the mob back in the 90s. Of course, we'll find everything." Half an hour later, a file containing the history of the property lot lay before Sim. She flipped through the yellowed pages. Here was the first owner. Here was the second, and here was the bill of sale in Denise Peterson's name. Date, 3 years ago. The sale amount was laughable. The appraised value was undervalued by a factor of 10. But the most interesting thing was at the end, the notary's signature, I. Hawthorne. Sim frowned. She had heard that name. Hawthorne was known in the city as a black market real estate lawyer. He handled transactions that smelled of crime from a mile away. Houses belonging to deceased lonely seniors, strange wills, disputed land. Sim found the address of Hawthorne's law office. She drove there immediately, hoping to corner him. If he had falsified documents or processed the sale improperly, it was a chance to annul the mother-in-law's ownership. The office was closed. A sign on the door read, "For lease." Sim went into the neighboring stationery store. "Excuse me, did the lawyer Hawthorne move?" she asked the saleswoman. "Moved, all right," the woman snorted. "To the grave, died 6 months ago. Heart attack, or maybe he was helped along. Who knows, with his line of work." Sim felt the ground dropping out from under her feet. The key witness was dead. Loose ends tied up. She walked outside, sat on a bench and covered her face with her hands. A dead end. Denise had won. She had even foreseen this, but the auditor's brain wouldn't give up. Sim remembered the file in the archive. It held more than just agreements. There were receipts, appendices, copies of payment records. Where did Denise Peterson, who had worked her whole life as a simple bookkeeper for the HOA and was now on retirement, get the money for even the undervalued price of the land? $300,000. That wasn't pocket change. Sim returned to the archive. "I need to see the transaction appendix," she requested, "the confirmation of payment." The archivist brought another thin folder. Sim opened it. A copy of a bank transfer. Payer: Denise Peterson. Amount: $300,000. Bank: City Credit Union. Sim photographed the document. She called an acquaintance in the bank's security department. "Alex, run this payment, please. It's urgent. Where did the money come from to the sender's account before this transaction?" "Half an hour, Sim," Alex replied. Those 30 minutes stretched into an eternity. Sim paced in circles in the park outside the archive, kicking the snow. If the money was clean, savings, inheritance, anything legal, then all was lost. The phone chimed. A message from Alex. "Interesting picture, Sim. The money was deposited into your lady's account the day before the transaction. One single transfer from a corporate entity, the Sanctuary HOA. Payment description, road repair, and infrastructure replacement." Sim froze. The Sanctuary HOA. That was their subdivision. The same upscale subdivision where their house stood. And then the puzzle clicked. Denise had been the treasurer for the HOA for the past 5 years. All the neighbors knew she was an activist, constantly collecting money for security gates, guards, and asphalt. Sim opened the neighborhood chat on her phone. The latest messages were full of anger. "Where's the road? Why are there potholes again? We all paid $10,000. Where is the result?" Denise had replied to everyone, "The contractor let us down. We're looking for a new one. We're short on funds. Need to raise more." She hadn't just bought the land with someone else's money. She had stolen that money from her own neighbors, the same wealthy, influential women she loved to brag to about her status. She took the general fund for road repairs, transferred it to herself under a fake contract, and used it to buy the lot she was now holding hostage. The entire neighborhood, every family, every house, had paid for the land on which Denise Peterson was playing the Baroness. Sim slowly lowered her phone. A cold, predatory smile touched her lips. A witness was unnecessary. The notary was unnecessary. She held a bomb in her hands that could blow up not only the fence, but Denise Peterson's entire life, and the fuse was already lit. Sim didn't go to the police. Filing a police report would be too slow, too bureaucratic. It would give Denise time to find a lawyer and drag the case out. No, Sim needed an immediate effect. She needed a social, bloodless, but no less brutal form of justice. She opened the neighborhood chat. The Sanctuary Wives. This chat included all the women Denise had so painstakingly fawned over, whose approval she sought, whose recipes she copied. Wives of executives, businesswomen, socialites. Sim typed a short message. "Urgent meeting at the clubhouse in 1 hour. Topic: Where did our road funds disappear? Come if you don't want to keep paying scammers. Documents will be provided. Send." An hour later, the meeting room at the local clubhouse was packed. All the women, dressed in expensive coats and carrying designer bags, were there, annoyed that they had been pulled away from their errands, but intrigued by the scent of scandal. Sim stepped onto the stage. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. She connected her laptop to the projector. "Good afternoon," she said into the microphone. Her voice was firm. "Many of you know my mother-in-law, Denise Peterson. She's our treasurer. She constantly tells us that the till is empty, that we need to chip in more, that contractors are letting us down. She's been saying we're short on funds for 3 years. A murmur of agreement ran through the hall. "Now, look at the screen." Sim brought up the first spreadsheet. This is a statement from our HOA account. Here are the deposits from you all, millions of dollars. And here's an expenditure. $300,000 went to a shell corporation called Construction Services, supposedly for road repairs on Forest Lane. But there are still potholes there, shouted a woman in the front row, the wife of a local congressman. I ruined my suspension there yesterday. Correct, Sim nodded, because there was no repair. And here's the statement from the Construction Services account. Sim clicked the slide. On the very same day the money came from us, it was transferred to Denise Peterson's personal account. The hall gasped. And the next day, Sim switched the slide. Denise Peterson used that money to pay for the purchase of a residential lot, the very lot where the house she lives in stands. She bought the land under her house with your money. The silence in the room became deafening. Then it exploded. It wasn't just a murmur. It was the roar of enraged lionesses. These women could forgive gossip. They could forgive bad taste in clothing, but they would never forgive being played for fools. Denise hadn't just stolen. She had humiliated them, forcing them to pay for her security while she played the aristocrat. Where is she? The congressman's wife yelled, standing up. Let's go see her right now. She's home, Sim replied calmly, hosting a dinner for her future daughter-in-law. The crowd surged toward the exit. Sim walked last. She knew what was about to happen. This would be worse than any police action. This was a social execution. Meanwhile, in the house, Denise was on cloud nine. The blockade had worked. Sim had disappeared earlier that morning. Apparently, she had run off to find money for the rent. The mother-in-law had set the table in the living room. The guard in the kitchen, following Sim's order not to interfere, merely watched sullenly. Tiffany was their guest. Eat up, sweetie, eat up, Denise cooed, serving her salad. You need your strength. The other one will break soon. Sign all the papers and we'll be set. You'll be the lady of the house here. And Vivian? We'll find a cheap care home somewhere far away, Denise said with a dismissive wave. Tiffany smiled contentedly, stroking her belly. Marcus sat beside her, agreeing with his mother, already mentally arranging his furniture in his father-in-law's study. Suddenly, a commotion came from the street, a rising tide of voices, like the surf. What's all that noise? Denise frowned. Did that crazy woman start a protest? She walked to the window, pulled back the heavy curtain, and went white. A mob was standing by the gates, dozens of women. And they weren't just onlookers. They were the very socialites Denise dreamed of having tea with. But now their faces were distorted with rage. Denise, come out, you thief! The congressman's wife screamed, shaking her fist. Give us back our money! Open the gates, you con artist! We know you bought the land with our funds! Denise recoiled from the window as if from fire. The curtain slipped from her trembling fingers. They know, she whispered. How did they find out? The first rock flew into the gates, followed by a clod of dirt. Marcus! She shrieked. Do something! Call security! Marcus rushed to the window, saw the enraged crowd, and understood. This is the end of his mother, her reputation, her influence, her place in this society. If he went out now to defend her, they would tear him apart along with her. Those women would ruin them. They would shut every door in the city in their faces. He looked at his mother. She was pacing the room, clutching her chest, grabbing her phone, clinging to the edge of the table. She looked pathetic. I can't, Marcus mumbled. Mom, these are your problems. I had nothing to do with this. What? Denise froze. You're abandoning me? Your own mother? I have to think about the baby. Marcus nodded at the frightened Tiffany. We can't handle this stress. We're leaving. He grabbed Tiffany's arm and dragged her toward the back door. Marcus, wait! His mother cried after him, but he wasn't listening. He dashed into the foyer, snatched his overnight bag that he hadn't unpacked since yesterday, and frantically began stuffing documents into it. Passport, driver's license, wallet. Faster, Tiffany, faster, he urged. We'll go to your apartment in the city, lie low until this blows over. But Marcus, Tiffany whined, what about the house? You promised. To hell with the house. Can't you see what's happening? They're going to lynch us." He pulled out his phone to call an Uber. The app returned a payment error. What the heck? Marcus frowned, tried another card. Transaction declined. A third. Card blocked. He logged into his mobile bank. A red message flashed on the screen. Accounts frozen. Suspicious activity. "No, no, no," he whispered, stabbing the screen with his finger. "This is a mistake. This can't be happening." Sim appeared in the foyer doorway. She had walked in through the front entrance, which the crowd wasn't yet storming, giving her a clear path. She stood with her arms crossed, watching her husband with icy calm. "Where are you going in such a rush, darling?" she asked. "Sim!" Marcus scrambled toward her. "Sim, what's wrong with the cards? Why aren't they working? Unblock them. You're an auditor. You messed something up." "I didn't mess anything up," she replied. "I filed for divorce this morning, and as part of the asset division procedure, I filed a request for an asset freeze. And also," she paused, savoring the moment, "as a certified auditor, I am obligated to report suspicious financial schemes. Your transfers to Tiffany's apartment came from the same accounts your mother used to launder the stolen HOA money. To the bank, you're both accomplices in a money laundering case." Marcus dropped his phone. You blocked everything." "Absolutely everything. You can't even buy a bus ticket. You're bankrupt, Marcus, and you're not going anywhere." Tiffany, hearing the word bankrupt, let go of Marcus's arm. She looked at him, then at Sim, then at the enraged crowd outside the window. "You said you had money," she hissed. "You said you were rich." "Tiffany, it's temporary. I'll fix everything," Marcus bleated, trying to grab her elbow. "Don't touch me," she screamed. "You penniless loser!" At that moment, a brick flew into the living room window. The glass shattered with a crash. Denise, sitting on the floor in the center of the room, covered her head with her hands and wailed. Sim watched this and felt no pity. She felt only cold satisfaction. The trap had sprung. The rats were cornered. Another stone hit the wall with a dull thud. Somewhere, shards of glass rattled on the porch. Outside, the crowd was raging, demanding blood and money. And inside the house, the air thickened with hatred, becoming dense and suffocating. Marcus, realizing there was nowhere to run and his accounts were empty, slowly turned to his mother, who was still on the floor among the broken vase shards. "This is your fault," he snarled. His face was contorted. "This is your stupid schemes. Nobody will ever find out, Marcus. Everything is under control, Marcus." "Well, there's your control. We're going to be killed because of your greed." Denise raised her head. In her eyes, usually full of arrogance, there was now a look of animal fear, which quickly changed to the rage of a cornered rat. "My fault?" she screeched, scrambling to her feet. "I did all this for you. So you could live in a decent home, not a hovel. So you could have status. And you couldn't even keep your woman in line. If you hadn't brought that damn auditor here, we'd be living like kings." "Don't you dare call her that," Marcus roared. "Sim isn't a thief. You're the criminal. You stole from the neighbors. You set me up. My accounts are frozen because of you. I'm broke." "You're broke because you're weak," his mother spat in his face. "You've always been a mama's boy who couldn't take a single step without me telling you to. I found you a wife. I found you a mistress. I built you a house and all you can do is whine." Marcus reared back, but didn't dare strike. His hand trembled and dropped weakly. He paced the room like a caged animal. Tiffany, huddled in the corner of the sofa, watched the spectacle in silence with an expression of disgust. Suddenly, Marcus stopped. His gaze fell on Sim, who was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the agony of their family with cold curiosity. A switch flipped in Marcus's head. Fear and greed whispered the only way out: betrayal. He approached Sim with quick steps, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Sim, listen," he rushed, grabbing her sleeve. "We need to talk. Alone." Sim jerked her arm away with distaste. "What do we have to talk about, Marcus?" "A deal. I can help you, seriously. Let's go to the kitchen, please." Sim hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Fine. 5 minutes. She turned and headed for the kitchen. Marcus, throwing a quick glance at his mother, who had started wailing again, hurried after her. Tiffany remained in the living room, glued to her phone. The kitchen was quiet. The guard who was standing by the door went out into the hall at a sign from Sim, leaving them alone. Marcus closed the door and leaned against it, breathing heavily. "Sim, I get it. I was an idiot," he began, trying to sound sincere. "My mother messed with my head. She's been pressuring me my whole life, but I can fix everything." "How?" Sim asked dryly, pouring herself a glass of water. "I know about the land, about the HOA scheme. I know where she keeps the originals of the dark ledger. I saw her forge the neighbors' signatures." He stepped closer, looking into her eyes. "I can give an official statement on record. I'll turn her in lock, stock, and barrel. I'll tell them how she stole, how she bribed that lawyer. You won't even have to prove anything. My testimony will be enough to send her to prison for 10 years, and the land will go back to the HOA, and then you can buy it fair and square." Sim slowly put the glass down on the counter. "And what do you want in return?" "Freedom," Marcus answered quickly. "And a little money, just a little. $30,000 for starters. I need to leave with Tiffany, start a new life away from here, unfreeze one account, transfer me that amount, and I'll sign whatever you tell me to, right now." He looked at her hopefully. He was selling his mother for $30,000 and a one-way ticket. Sim remained silent. She looked at the man she had lived with for 10 years and didn't recognize him. Or rather, she finally saw the real him. Empty, cowardly, ready to sell anyone for his own comfort. "Fine," she said, "write it out." She took a sheet of paper and a pen from a drawer and tossed them on the counter. "Write a full confession that you knew about your mother's schemes, but kept quiet, and where the documents are. Detailed. Go." Marcus snatched the pen. His hands were shaking with impatience. He began scribbling, muttering under his breath, "I, Marcus Peterson, confirm, Denise Peterson, illegally." The kitchen door quietly opened. Vivian Jones stood in the doorway. She had heard everything. She had been standing in the hall, her ear pressed to the door. Every word from her son-in-law had fallen into her heart like a drop of acid. But instead of pain, clarity came. Vivian walked into the kitchen. She walked not with the shuffling gait of a beaten old woman, but with firm, purposeful steps. Her back was straight. Marcus looked up from the paper and froze. He had never seen his mother-in-law like this. There were no tears in her eyes, no pleading. There was steel. Vivian walked up to the counter. Marcus instinctively pressed himself into the chair. "Vivian, we're just agreeing on terms with Sim," he started to stammer. A ringing slap interrupted him mid-sentence. Marcus's head snapped to the side. His cheek instantly flared red. It was not the blow of a weak woman, but the blow of a person who had endured too much for too long. "Mom!" Sim gasped. Vivian looked down at her son-in-law. "Don't you dare," she said quietly but distinctly. "Don't you dare bargain. You sold your conscience a long time ago, but selling your mother? That's the lowest thing even for trash like you." "But I'm doing this for you," Marcus shrieked, clutching his cheek, "to get the land back." "I don't need your handouts," Vivian cut him off, "and I don't need your testimony. I want you to suffer, to feel what it's like to be betrayed by the ones closest to you, to be discarded like a useless thing." She turned to Sim. "Don't give him a dime, daughter. Let him sign it for free, or let him go to hell." Marcus looked at the paper, then at Sim. He knew the money was gone, but the fear of prison was stronger. If he didn't sign, Sim would turn him in as an accomplice. If he did, maybe they would lighten his sentence. "Fine," he yelled. "Fine, I'll sign it. But you let me go." He furiously scrawled his signature under the confession. "There. Happy? I turned her in. I wrote everything down. Now let me leave." Sim took the sheet, checked the signature, carefully folded the paper, and put it in her pocket. "Thank you, Marcus," she said. "Very thorough." Then she reached for the counter, picked up a cloth napkin that had been lying next to a fruit bowl, and pulled out her phone. The screen was lit. A call was in progress. Speakerphone was on. Marcus went cold. Who? Who is that? He whispered. Tiffany, did you hear all of that? Sim asked loudly into the phone. A hysterical, shrieking voice came from the speaker. It was so loud that Marcus staggered back. Hear it? I heard everything. You! It was Tiffany. She was sitting in the living room, literally just on the other side of the wall, but Sim had called her mobile phone 5 minutes ago before going into the kitchen and asked her to listen to something interesting. Tiffany, baby, I can explain everything, Marcus stammered, trying to grab the phone. Don't you dare call me! Tiffany was screaming into the receiver. You sold your own mother for $30,000. You miserable failure. You're broke. You're a traitor. I thought you were a man, but you're a worm. Tiffany, we have a baby, Marcus pleaded. A baby! Tiffany burst out laughing, and the sound was worse than the slap. I don't care about your baby. I'm calling Wade, my ex, right now. He's an idiot, but at least he has a truck and he doesn't sell his mama. You can rot in prison. I'm leaving right now. The call ended with a short series of beeps. Silence hung in the kitchen. Marcus stood, staring at the phone in Sim's hand, as if it were a pistol that had just been fired into his face. In that minute, he lost everything. The wife who despised him, the mother he had betrayed who would now curse him, the mistress who turned out to be just as predatory as he was and abandoned him at the first sign of trouble, and the money and the house. He was utterly alone. Vivian looked at him with disgusted pity, wiped the hand that had struck him on her apron as if shaking off dirt, and walked out of the kitchen. Sim silently pointed to the back door. Go, Marcus, before the neighbors break through the front entrance. Go walk. Go to nowhere. Marcus, swaying like a drunk, stumbled toward the exit. He opened the door to the cold, dark night. The wind howled out there, but that chill was nothing compared to the emptiness inside him. The back door slammed shut, and Marcus disappeared into the darkness. Sim locked the deadbolts, checked the latch, and leaned her forehead against the cold wood. The silence in the house was deceptive. It wasn't peace. It was the lull before the final blow. Denise Peterson was sitting in her ground floor room. She had heard her son leave, heard Tiffany's screams as she fled through the main door once the crowd of neighbors had thinned out, scared off by the late-night cold. Denise was alone. She sat in the dark, rocking on her chair. Only one thought spun in her head, pulsing like an abscess. They took everything from me. The land, the money, my reputation, my son. Tomorrow, the police would come. Tomorrow they would lead her away in handcuffs while those sanctuary hags jeered at her. No, she whispered, her lips twisting into a mad smile. That won't happen. If this house isn't mine, then it won't be anyone's. She waited until the footsteps upstairs had faded. Sim and Vivian, exhausted beyond measure, were finally asleep. The guard in the kitchen had also dozed off, sitting on a chair. Denise, silent as a shadow, crept into the hallway. In her hand, she clutched a keyring for the garage. Her plan was simple and insane. Fire. The home insurance policy was in her name, another one of her little tricks. If the house burned down, she would get the payout. And the documents? All the documents proving her land scheme would burn with the walls. No one would be able to prove a thing. She would say the wiring shorted out. Old wiring installed by those clumsy contractors. She walked into the garage. It smelled of gasoline and old rubber. In the corner stood jerry cans, old, metal, heavy. She had stored them there for years, just in case. Now the time had come. Denise struggled to twist the cap off the first can. The sharp chemical smell hit her nose. She began pouring the contents onto the floor. The gasoline spread in a dark puddle over the concrete, creeping toward the shelving unit filled with paint cans, toward the wooden frame leading into the main house. Burn, all of you, burn, she whispered, splashing the second can onto the walls. It's mine. It's all mine. She pulled out a lighter. A tiny flame flickered in the darkness, illuminating her face, distorted by madness. "Well, here we go," she cackled, and tossed the lighter into the puddle. The fire ignited instantly with a dull whoomph, like a beast released from a cage. The flame licked the walls, greedily attacking the oily rags in the corner. Heat blasted her face. Denise backed toward the exit, but then realized that the garage door leading outside was jammed. She yanked the handle, useless. The old lock, which should have been oiled long ago, was seized tight. The fire was already cutting off the path back into the house. She was caught in the trap she had set for everyone else. "Help!" she screamed, pounding her fists on the metal door.